Welcome to today's episode of the Australian Lawn and Garden Podcast. In today's episode, we're interviewing Garry Ashton. He's the host of Aussie Lawn Stars, which is a great podcast. And he's also a great guest because he has interviewed maybe 70, maybe 80, maybe more different business owners in the Australian lawn and garden scene, which means he has such a great pulse on what's going on in this industry. He's got a lot of great things to say, a lot of helpful advice. So buckle in. This should be a good one. I'll see you in the podcast. And we're live. Garry Ashton, how you going, mate?
I'm nervous. I'm not used to doing this.
Yeah. How many interviews have you actually done and you're nervous about being interviewed?
I have released 88 episodes on the Aussie Lawn Stars, but I can tell you what, I don't do most of the talking. I get the people I'm interviewing to do a lot of talking. And even then, like, you can tell when a new person comes on, they're fine if you're just talking to them. So I don't introduce, we're going to press record now. I'm just like, hey, how you going? Tell me about your day. What's your hobbies? Which is, you know, great to talk about hobbies. I love talking about that. If I tell them we're going to press record now, there's just silence. And I'm like, oh, that didn't work so well. So yeah, I'm nervous. Wow. Can you see my Adam's apples jumping up and down? Because
Well, I'll come over and I'll give you a big hug and make you feel a little more welcome.
Oh, thanks.
It'd take a while for me to drive there, though.
Just a couple of days.
Look, well, for those who don't know, you've done the Aussie Lawn Stars podcast for about a year and a half. And this is why I wanted to get you on the podcast. We got on really well. You've come over here and we've hung out a little bit. But the other thing is that, so I know that you know the business well, but I think given the podcast, you just said 88 interviews, probably about, I would guess 70 something of them were Australian lawn care, garden care businesses. Would that be about right?
Yeah, maybe more than 70. I think there's probably half a dozen where they're specifically, say, manufacturers or somebody from overseas or something like that. So there's certainly at least 70 are Australian businesses.
But the point that I'm getting is, whether it's 70 or 75, I don't know if there's anybody else in the country who's actually talked to as many like Australian small businesses in this industry as you have. So I think you've got your finger on the pulse in a really unique way. And I really want to talk about the things that you're seeing, things that you've talked about in your podcast. And I think the common pitfalls, successful things, tips and tricks on running a business, things like that you've just noticed over close to 2 years now of talking to people. And I think that there's going to be some huge value in this for especially people who are fairly new in the industry. This could be a massive shortcut. And I think that's what your podcast is really as a whole. It's a huge shortcut for, especially compared to when we started business.
Well, look, I can't give away all of my secrets unless you're willing to be a sponsor for the podcast. But no.
I'll give you $1.50. Is that enough?
No. For those people who don't know, I do a little spot at the beginning of each episode for Luke.
Thanks, Garry.
But yeah, I've learned a lot of things from talking to other people in business, and I've shared a little bit about what I've learned from running my own business occasionally as well. I try not to share too much about myself. I'm much more comfortable asking other people those difficult questions.
Do you have an episode that, I mean, you don't want to say your favorites or anything, but maybe more specifically, is there an episode that changed your mind on something you weren't expecting to have your mind changed on?
I'd have to say, sorry for everybody else, but the favorite episodes are the ones I've done with a guy called Luke Smith.
Really? You're just saying that because I'm here.
Well, look, if Ben Vandergeesen was doing the interview, I might drop his name instead. No, seriously, they were really awesome episodes. And as far as download numbers go, the episodes with you talking about business rate really well with the listener as well. So
really, there you go.
There's been a number of other ones that really got me excited, though. So one of the ones that I did is with a guy named Jared Bywater.
Oh yeah.
And for the average person listening to that interview, you go, "Oh, he sounds a little bit awkward. Well, it's boring." But I've had a number of people reach out to me and say, "I'm so glad you did that interview. It is awesome to see somebody like Jared running a successful business, and he's got the things he needs to enjoy life by doing that." And, you know, Jared struggles with a little bit of autistic spectrum disorder, but he's done exceptionally well in school, and he's running a business, which is, for him, it's the best way to get what he wants out of life and have a good balance.
What were the things on that podcast? It sounds like there's a bit of maturity in Jared then, that you're saying that maybe there isn't the charismatic, easy listening sort of thing that goes on, that sometimes on the internet people, like it happens a lot on the internet and in general in life. Like somebody just comes across with confidence and you believe what they say because they're saying it with confidence. And that's actually where the term con man came from. It was literally shortened for confidence man. They gave you confidence in something that wasn't true. But sounds like you're saying Jared is somebody who maybe doesn't have that charismatic flair. I haven't listened to the episode, so maybe I should now. But I definitely will now.
Yeah.
But knows what he's talking about. Is that what you're getting at?
Not that he knows what he's talking about even. It's that once you get past the awkwardness of the interview, once you get past the distractibility of him, because with autistic spectrum, he was very easily distracted, and at various points in the interview, I'm going, oh, how do I bring this back in, bring the topic back in, get it back on track? It was a challenging interview for me, but
sure,
it was so authentic.
Real world.
You know, I could point out, and I won't do that. I won't say the ones I think maybe there might be a con man on the other end of the line. Go back and listen to all 88 episodes. Tell me if you think there's a con man there anywhere other than me.
Listen to Luke Smith episodes.
But yeah, out of all the episodes, and there's a few other ones that have been really touching for me as well, but that one stood out as one that I'm really glad I did. And I don't even care if it didn't rate well. I was just really, really enthusiastic about doing that one.
Yeah. So you've been running your own business for, well over 10 years, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, 13 years. I started in 2010, so it's pretty easy to do the maths on that.
That in and of itself is a huge success, because not many people last very long, right? Not in this industry, at least.
That's true. It's one of those things I say in my podcast. If you go back and listen, almost every episode, you'll hear me talking about it's a low barrier to entry industry, meaning that anybody, doesn't matter if you've got a good paying job or not, anybody can grab 3 tools and a Commodore wagon and off they go.
Yep. And just start charging $50 here and there. And
most of them charging $25, $30.
Well, yeah, that's
you have to think about it though. If you've got a job, and even if you don't have a job, you're on Centrelink payments and you're not declaring your income from mowing a couple of lawns. If you go out on a Sunday and you mow 3 lawns for $25 each, that's beer money.
Exactly. Don't declare it.
Yeah.
Bit of cash.
Yep. You already got those tools to do your own lawn.
Exactly. But do you think, because you hear it a lot, do you think that those are the type of people who are ruining the industry? No. Or do you think that it's a little bit deeper than that?
Do you actually think that people are ruining the industry? I don't.
That's a good question. Because you hear it a lot on these pages, right? It's like the people who undercharge are ruining the industry, or this person is ruining the industry, or what do you think about that?
So the number one reason why I chose to do a podcast for the lawn care and gardening industry is because I believe that everybody who wants to participate in this industry can do it in a meaningful way for themselves, and it doesn't have to be the same as the next person. Take you and I, for example. You're really successful with running a team of people, having employees, having an admin person, having a manager, which is yourself, and running a business where you're able to pass on those business numbers to other people in a really meaningful way. I've been in business similar amount of time to you, and I have my own successes, but it's completely different to what you do. And I'm a 2-person team most of the time. So myself and maybe 1 employee. There's been times where I've had 4 employees on at once, but for the most part, we're completely different. And that doesn't mean you're successful and I'm not, or I'm successful and you're not.
Yeah,
so
totally
my
agree.
podcast is all about presenting that to people and going, hey, as long as you're aware and not just running blind, then you can choose to run a business in this industry in a way that's meaningful. And is it damaging the industry because there's so much variety, because there's so much interest from people, from bankers through to dole bludgers?
Yeah, I totally agree with the success thing too. And I think sometimes people misinterpret some of the advice that comes online as you should do this, not consider if this is the best thing for you because it was really helpful for me. Do you know what I mean? Because some people are coming in saying, for example, there's a guy called Daniel Smith who's got a Gianni Ferrari and he loves his Gianni Ferrari.
Yes.
And I have the direct competitor of that, which is called a Walker. And
well, good choice, by the way.
But to be honest, it's like I could have gone either way. And it's sort of like, it's one of those things where people go on the internet, it's like, you're an idiot for buying a Gianni Ferrari, or you're an idiot for buying the Walker. And you guys, you know, it's like, but I really don't think you couldn't define. Somebody might go on there and say, I bought a Gianni Ferrari and it was the best thing I ever did for my business. And 90 people will interpret that as, you don't have a Gianni Ferrari, so you're an idiot. It's like, that's not what I'm saying. Well, everybody who owns a Walker is an idiot because you should have got a Gianni Ferrari, or vice versa. And the internet blows this stuff up. And so then you hear, like, you know, a lot of this, the last video I did on this podcast was how to work out your charging. And the whole idea was to go, here's a spreadsheet. And hopefully you can use your own numbers to work out what suits you instead of undercharging, and undercharging compared to your own numbers, not undercharging compared to what I'm doing. And somebody commented on it on Facebook, basically being like, this is just somebody showing off how much they're charging. It's like, oh, no, it's not. Oh,
it's the complete opposite, right?
It's the internet's like that. I'm not saying that you need to charge certain amount, otherwise you're a cowboy. It's like, you need to charge at some point enough money to make money, and that's all I care about. And if it's half the price we're charging, it doesn't bother me at all, you know?
Yeah, so like that comment on your video saying that you're just bragging about how much you're charging, I occasionally get people point out to me the exact opposite of what I'm trying to achieve on the podcast, and going, oh yeah, don't listen to these people who are saying this. There's only one way to look at this. And it's like, actually, I'm trying to promote that there's not just one way to look at these things. So I love the debates like mulch versus catch, and
totally.
you know, Sandley versus what Toro. But at the end of the day, you can run a business with a Sandley mower. You can run a business where you're catching all of the grass. You can run a business where you're mulching all of the grass. The 100%. Biggest thing that I've promoted is maybe you could do both. Maybe you don't have to do it one way or the other way in order to be successful.
This is one of the things that I think I want to try and find a photo if I can. Because if I can find this will be great, because I don't know if anyone's seen, I have shared it once before a long time ago, but back in the day, I had a photo of when I started the business, and people would have called me a cowboy. I'll see if I can find it. It might take me a little bit to find, because it'd be deep in the recesses of my...
I would have labeled myself as a cowboy back when I started, and some people probably still would label me as a cowboy.
Yeah, look, I would have labeled myself as a cowboy because I had an X-Trail. That's when I started.
That's better than a Commodore wagon. Wow.
It's by how many percent? 1% better? It's not magnitudes better, that's for sure.
Well, it depends on what you're rating, right? If you're a diehard Holden fan, then no. But if you're talking about space and ease of use for running your business, 1%.
Yeah, it's not much, I have to be honest. Yes. I'm going to try. It will take me a little bit to find it on here. While I'm trying to find this, why don't you tell me 13 years ago what Garry was like when he started?
What I was like? So business-wise?
What was the business like? What were you thinking What were the not embarrassing? I don't want to embarrass you, but like there's
I
things
didn't
that you
have
look
quite
back
as
on
much grey in that hair there. No.
Slightly better looking.
Oh yeah, no, heaps better.
Objectively speaking.
So business-wise, what was I like 13 years ago? I was going to look a lot like a cowboy, but I thought I knew what I was doing. So much like a lot of people in this industry, very headstrong. I know what the right way to do things is, and I had experience. So I had already 13 years ago. I already had experience using zero-turn mowers and ride-on mowers, and using whippersnippers and blowers, and looking after, because I grew up on 2.5 acres, and we kept that place looking spectacular.
Yeah.
So when I say spectacular, excuse me, when I say spectacular, it was like we never knew how to do vertical edging, so not that spectacular. And we didn't use a cylinder mower; we used a ride-on.
Well, look, we can talk about cylinder mowers later. But
so, yeah, I went into business thinking I knew what to do, and to the point that I bought a lawn mowing run off my friend, and I had told my friend what he should do in order to start that lawn run before I bought it off him, because I knew more about lawn mowing than he did. So I thought I was a pretty good expert, right? I'd already helped him start his business, and then I bought his business off him when he went and changed what he wanted to do something else. So I thought I knew what I was on about.
What gave you, look, because this reminds me of me a little bit, right? Like all the confidence, because, I'd listened to some stuff on YouTube for about 15 minutes. So I knew what I was talking about. Why do you think, why is that a common theme, do you think? It might just be that you have to have that level of arrogance to actually start a business. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's that, but also another factor that's really big with lawn mowing is that it's a technical job. And I'm using the word job rather than business, because what most people do when they start lawn mowing is they're buying themselves a job. And being a technical job, the technically minded person is the expert in whatever they do. That's the way that a technical mind functions. So if you're technically minded, you're possibly on the autistic spectrum a little bit. And that means that you're going to consider yourself an expert somewhat. And if you're not the expert already, you're going to study it, you're going to YouTube it until you believe you are the expert.
Right.
So it's sort of bred into the type of people that like to do it.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I feel like too. Is like, because you have to have, when you're doing something that fully depends on you, right? And that's like individual sports, or small business is such an obvious thing. There needs to be a healthy level of arrogance, right? And maybe arrogance isn't the right word, but I think it's a word that people understand, at least, where you at least have some steel in your spine. You're at least not a pushover. And people who have that "I'm not a pushover" also go a little bit too far into "I know more than what I really know," or "I'm too," and that comes back to that sort of con man attitude. But that reminds me of me when I was young, because I had done a few things that were sort of cool, and a bit challenging. And so at 19 years old, I was like, yeah, I can start my own business, and I can hire people, and I couldn't. Well, I could, but I was what I thought I was compared to what I really was knowledge-wise was just two completely different things. And on that note, here's a photo I found. This is what Silverstone gardening was when I started, believe it or not. So that's my
looking
X
at
trail.
that photo, I'm going, all right. The signage looks like it's still Silverstone, yeah.
It's still Silverstone. So I did know a thing or two. I had read a few marketing books. That was my first employee. So this is probably a year into having a business, something like that.
The trail running well, pulling the trailer.
The X Trail's there. Yeah, that's the old trusty steed, and that is a Super Swift with a Kohler engine on it. I still have that in my shed. It doesn't work anymore.
I was going to say, is that a cylinder mower? Because it looks kind of silly for a cylinder mower.
It's definitely not a cylinder mower. That is not even a self-propelled 21-inch. That's an 18-inch
There you go.
human-powered. Well, not obviously the engine, but it doesn't drive itself. There
Yep.
is a cylinder mower in that trailer. Well, I don't know
Okay.
that day, but I did have a cylinder mower from day one. Well,
Yep. It looks like you
maybe
got 2 wheelie bins in the front of the trailer to put the grass clippings in.
I did. Yep. No mower deck, right? And
Yep.
so that's how I started. So I'm definitely not somebody who's against the inverted commas cowboy undercharging, because you got to start somewhere, but you just can't stay there. You can't stay there for long. And it's not that Luke doesn't think you should stay there for long. It's literally, if you're not making money, you just can't. You'll eventually run out of money. So you need to know how to charge. You need to know how to run a successful business. And it's not a kick in the guts to people who want to have. I mean, if you're still running with an X-Trail, look, it doesn't look very professional, but hey, look, I totally understand. Maybe that's all you can afford. And you got to have a family car. You got to take your kids to school, and you don't have parking space for a second ute and spare 15 grand to buy it. It's like, power to you. Just, I guess what I want to do, which is same to what you were talking about, you want to help people get a meaningful business. I think the industry is rife with bad advice, and you can go online and find great business advice, but it's usually tailored to beauty products and internet services and real estate, and there isn't too much good business advice for small businesses in our industry.
Yeah. Well, when I first started my podcast, I'd spent years listening to podcasts while I was mowing lawns. Yep. And to start with, it was all of those other podcasts. It was either stories or a Christian podcast or a how to run a business podcast. And eventually I stumbled across a guy in Canada called Julio Tomei running a lawn care podcast.
Oh, right. I haven't heard that one.
He sounded kind of dorky and stumbled over his words a bit, and I resonated with that. And I was like, you know what? I think he's doing a good job overall. He may not be the most professional person in the world doing a podcast, and hopefully he's not listening to this going, what? But he's progressed a long way. And in the meantime, I looked at it and going, you know what? He's got really great advice. I learnt from what he had to say back then, the first year that he started up. I learned a lot of good things, good tips and good value. And his was predominantly from Canada, aimed at the US and Canada. So there was a number of times I was going, his podcast it resonates with me, but it doesn't, because it misses the mark when it comes to what we're dealing with in Australia. Yeah, and there's a lot of that online. Like
there's Brian Fullerton and
Paul Jameson.
There's a few of those guys.
There's a lot of them there now.
Yeah, and they do these blogging, and it's like, man, you can watch it, and maybe somewhere between 20 and 70% of their video might overlap with what Australians do. You know what I mean? And so it's like, it's worth listening to, but it's just not quite, it's never quite what we do. Like, their climate is different, their grass is different, the way they cut is different. Like everything's different.
They don't have grass to cut their blowing snow.
Exactly. Or they're in like a Florida or something like that, where this never stops growing. It's like, and it's just, it's such a different world. And look, that's why we need these Australian ones, because and this is what your podcast does. You hear the real world stories. Yeah. And it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. So one of the things I found listening to the Canadian podcasts and the US podcasts, one of the reasons I would switch them off is because they'd get boring and repetitive. And what I would do is, instead of subscribing to the podcast long term, I'd switch off that subscribe button and I would look for the ones that said interviewing somebody from the lawn care industry. So very quickly I was like, if I was going to start a podcast, it would have to be primarily focused on interviewing other people who do the same sort of thing as I do. Because those ones are much more interesting than listening to that guy prattle on in his own, talking about nothing.
Yep, I totally agree.
So that's what I've done.
And it sparks creative juices when you're talking with somebody, and you're limiting your knowledge. Because I'm going to do a bunch of podcasts where it's just me waffling on, but I don't want to. I can think of about 5 maybe that I want to do. And then the rest, I just want to talk to people, because I think you can do both. You can say what you want to say and have somebody else chip in, and maybe they add 1 or 2 sentences that just take it from level 80 advice to level 100 advice. And you know what I mean? Like, it just makes things better.
Yeah. And I've found that there's a number of times when I'm doing an episode or I've done an episode, go back and listen to it. And I'm like, oh, there's a topic that really needs to be spoken about. And so you start forming a list, and you might say you've got 5 at the moment. After you finish talking to me, there might be 6. And then when you talk to the next person, you might find all of a sudden you've got a list of 20.
Yeah, list of 20. And the one that I'm going to add to yours is subject of never talk to Garry Ashton again. That's probably what's going to come out of this.
Yeah, that's a good one. I reckon you could do a good hour on that.
No, I'm joking. 2 hours of why you shouldn't talk to. No, okay. Look, let's get into some meat on this now. I want to get some of the best nuggets from your podcasts that you've done. Get people a taste for it. If you've talked to 70, 80 businesses in the country, what's the number one thing people keep telling you when they look back on their business was a mistake that they made early on? What's the most common mistake you see? So we're talking about there'll be people listening to this business there, 2 months, 6 months, 1 year, maybe a little bit more in business. They're still finding their way. What's the number one thing people are making in your experience at that stage in business? Number one mistake.
When they're starting out?
In the first couple of months to year and a half.
Not looking at their numbers. Clearly. That's the number one thing that makes a big difference to what you do with your business, is to be aware. So if you're not aware, then you don't know that you need to increase your prices. You don't know that you need to look at your numbers. And if you don't know you need to look at your numbers, then don't look at your numbers, and you just keep on going blind.
What do you think why is that common? Like, because surely people would think, you would think on paper, like, oh, I've got to look at my numbers at some point. But why do you think people do they just not see the importance of it? Do they not have the time to do it? They're just flat out dealing with all these requests and learning how to run a business. They forget to do their accounting.
The predominant reason is they don't know what numbers to look at.
Right.
So for what I've seen people do is that they will do their first year, then they go to H&R Block, sorry for mentioning a company, and they say, here's my tax, do my tax, charge $150 and get my tax done. And it's like, hang on a minute, if you're running a business and you've got an ABN number and you've got insurance and all those things, then you should have talked to an accountant before you created the ABN. And if you've got an accountant that actually understands running a business instead of a H&R Block, and H&R Block do what they do, and they do it well. But if you want to run a business, then you need to talk to an accountant that can actually help you make the right decisions. And I listened to a guy by the name of Robert Kiyosaki way before I started business. And he said it best. He said, interview your accountant and hire the right one. Don't hire the first one. Yep. So you want to find an accountant that can answer your questions in a way that actually works. So just because they can answer your questions doesn't mean their answers are good. You want to actually check that and go, okay, interview the accountant. Are they a business accountant, and can they give you good advice? And if you do that, then you can go into business with a structure that's set up well for doing business. And then you can start thinking about what numbers you actually need to know. Whereas most people, they go, all right, I'm leaving a job working for the insurance company. Sorry, that was me. I did that. And all I'm doing is I'm creating myself a job.
Yep. Well, let's talk about the difference. In a minute, we'll talk about the difference between creating yourself a job or actually running a business. Yeah. But you said they don't know what questions to ask the accountant. So as someone who's been in business for 13 years and who's interviewed all these businesses, what are the top 3 things, 3 numbers that these small businesses just starting out should be looking at? What's the shortcut that you can give them to well, you said interview their accountant. What questions? What should they be looking at?
Yeah, so I would say the first thing you want to consider is the type of insurance you need. And the reason I say that is because if you ever think you're going to employ somebody, you need workers' compensation. And even if you're only going to be the only employee in your business, it's still a good idea to have workers' compensation insurance. But you can't do that with any old business structure. You need the right kind of structure to do it. So that takes, excuse me, the next question is, what type of business structure do I need to run the business I want?
Yep.
So that's two.
And so what about ongoing? So you set up with, you've got the right insurance now, you've got the right structure, right? Maybe you're asking your accountant those things.
Yep.
I think we know this, that once a year check up with the accountant because you have to is not a great plan, right?
No.
It's like, it's worse than a once a year checkup on your vehicle, right?
Yeah.
But it's the same sort of thing in that, like, you could be the problem with the once a year checkup on the vehicle is, you could be driving it and then you start hearing a sound and you realize you're doing some damage, and then you take it in and the mechanic goes, "Oh, you've done some damage," right? But at least you stopped when you started hearing a sound. You didn't make it worse. How do you hear what's going wrong with your business financially? How do you see what's going wrong with your business financially if you're not looking at your numbers? There's no feedback from a vehicle like that, like there is in a vehicle when you're driving it with noise or feel or anything like that. So it's worse. People keep driving figuratively their business without any feedback on whether or not it's going right or wrong. And then they take it to the mechanic and the mechanic tells them, "You've been going for 6 months destroying this thing."
Yep.
And it's too late by then. So there needs to be something regular, but what should we be asking regularly? What are the things that you really should be looking into when we're small businesses?
My first accountant was a great business accountant. He answered the questions correctly. But when I went back to him to talk to him about how my business was going, he didn't go through the numbers with me. And so it's like you're saying, you're flying blind, waiting for something to blow up.
Right.
And it wasn't until I was like, he's not actually willing to give me any time. And I went and found a new accountant. And the new accountant sat down and looked at my books and said, "You need to be charging more."
Right.
And I had done a little bit in that time of going, yeah, I need to be charging more, and worked out based on my hourly rate that I was using to calculate my quotes that even though I was charging around $50 an hour 13 years ago, I was actually taking home about $10 an hour as a wage if you work out all of the expenses and unbillable hours and all those factors that come into it, and just go, yep, I'm working for less than an award rate, less than than the poverty line, really, and it's not worth it. So I learned, but when I got from my accountant, hey, this is what you should be charging in order to meet the mark that you should be aiming for. And at that point in time, it was around $80 an hour. And I was like, how can I go from $50 an hour to $80 an hour? Tell my customers it's jumping up by $30 an hour. That's a massive increase.
Yeah. I remember being there too. Like, I never had to increase a big jump like that, but there's been so many times over the 10 years that I've been in business, maybe once every 2 years, where you come to the realization, it's like, things have gone up in price. Things have changed. I've taken on more bills. I need to change it.
Yeah.
And it's always daunting when you realize that and you go, oh no, like, I've got to go raise all these prices. But the other thing that happens is, no matter how much, it never really ends as badly in the real world as it does in your head.
We have a way of catastrophizing.
You know what I mean? You go raise your prices, and we do. And I think we were talking about this before the podcast about mindset, and there's this abundance and poverty mindset, and it's so, we get beaten down in business because every time you do a quote, right, you are putting yourself out there. You're making yourself vulnerable and open to rejection. And so you sort of start bracing yourself a little bit, and you get used to being rejected. You get used to that sort of stuff. And there's something that happens psychologically. I don't know, we shouldn't say psychologically because I'm not an expert in this, but this is just what I've noticed.
Yep.
Clients will tell you when you're too expensive, but almost no one ever tells you when you're too cheap. And so you don't realize maybe 2 out of 10 clients tell you too expensive, and you keep repeating that every time. But maybe 3 out of 10 clients have been saying in their head, 4 out of 10 clients have been saying in their head, maybe more, oh, this guy's cheap. And what happens is you start replaying that criticism over and over and over again. And so what happens is you've been quoting $50 an hour or whatever it is, and someone tells you you're too expensive. And then you go, well, how can I go to 80? And maybe what you don't realize is that maybe there's 4 or 5 people out of 10 who would have been fine with 80 from the get-go, but they didn't tell you because obviously they're being selfish, which they should be. It's business. And they go, well, I'm not going to tell them, but, and then you tell them, oh, it's got to be 80 now. And they go, okay, fine. Okay, I guess I'll accept the price.
Let me tell you
a story. Is that your experience?
I'll tell you a story about this that's helps to give some perspective. So I interviewed a guy called Keith Kalfas, and he's an American guy, so not one of the Australian lawn care guys that I've talked to. And he changed the way I thought about the numbers here. So when you're in scarcity mindset or poverty mindset, your goal is to win 100% of your quotes. And every time you get a no, that's a personal attack. How dare they tell me no? I start questioning myself. There's psychological stuff you say floating around in your head. I must be terrible. I must be overcharging. And then Keith Kalfas says to me, you want to win around 10 to 15% of the quotes that you'd put in, not 100%. And I had thought, at that point I'd grown from the total scarcity mindset to going, if I win 70 or 80% of the quotes, then I'm in the right ballpark. And he's like, no, you want to win 10 to 15% of the quotes. And that just blew my mind. It's like, how can you get to the point where you only want to win 10 to 15% of the quotes? But I'd already done it myself at one point many years ago. What I did is I got to the point where I was too busy to want to take on any more work. And I'd been doing jobs for $40, which I should have been charging $80 for. So I got to that point and I'm like, I'm too busy. I can't take on any more work. Shall I keep doing what I'm doing? Which obviously if it's a $40 job, not all of them are the same price, but if it's a $40 job, I'm not really making good money. So I got asked to do it.
Or any money.
Yes, I'm running at a loss. So I got asked to do this quote, and in my head, I'm already prepped myself. I'm like, all right, I'm too busy. I don't want the job. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go in. I'm going to charge double what I think it's worth. So I went in there and instead of the timid Garry going, oh, I think I can do it for $45. Will you accept 45 or do I need to drop to 40? I went in there with confident Garry. And I'm like, hey, you know what? It's $80. If you want me to do it, that's the best I can do. And in the back of my mind, I'm going, oh, if they say yes, I've got a problem. But it's a good problem because I can drop that $40 customer and I'm in front still.
Yes, yeah.
And they said yes.
And what did they say?
Straight away.
Wow.
Yes.
So the limit, that $40 difference was just in your head for that client, that is.
Well, not only that, but it was the scared, timid Garry worried about getting rejected for putting the price from $40 to $45. Compared to the confident Garry that goes in and says, hey, you know what? This job's worth $80 because let's face it, even if it wasn't worth $80, I was too busy to do it for $40.
Yeah.
Supply and demand.
Yeah, that's another question. Like, what is a job actually worth? Because it's different. Like there's no fair or unfair price. People talk about this, right? Like, what's a fair price for this? Or there was a post the other week on one of these Facebook pages we're a part of, where a guy had said, "Look, I've just bought this new equipment, and it's going to make me so much more efficient, and I'm already charging a good hourly rate, but I'm feeling like I'm going to rip my clients off now because I'm doubling my hourly rate or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And I asked him, I said, are your clients happy with the price? And he was like, yeah, they're happy with the price. Are they happy with the service? Yeah, they're happy with the service. So who's getting ripped off? Right? Like, just because you do it incredibly fast, if you're still delivering the great results, is that actually unfair? I don't think it is.
Well, this is the age-old debate, right? And you will get this, you'll be doing a job and say it's $100, right? And you're doing it with your Sandley 18-inch mower, push mower. It's not self-propelled, and it takes you a grueling hour to earn that $100. The customer sits there watching through the window and they go, oh, he's working really hard for that $100. Even though it's only 1 hour, I can see the blood, sweat, and tears pouring out of every orifice. Then you turn up there with I was going to mention brand, but let's just say a 72-inch stander, and you're done in 5 minutes.
Yep.
And you charge $100.
Yeah.
And you will get the customer come out occasionally, one or two, that will come out and say, I just paid you $100 for 5 minutes work. I'm not doing that.
Yep. What's the difference?
So what I've told people from learning from the podcast and learning from being in LMCA for the 5 years it's been up and running, I've said, look at it as art. If you tell that customer tomorrow, I can't come back and do your job at all, they're going to be disappointed. But if you say, I'm going to come back, I'm going to do the same art, it's going to look perfect. It's going to look like a picture from out of a princess magazine. It's just going to be exactly what you want. It doesn't matter how it's done. It's the art that they're paying for.
Yeah. Yeah, the result.
Once your customer treats the service as the finished product rather than the labor, then they respect the finished product. And I had this experience with a customer years and years ago. I went in and I quoted $150 to do the job and they rejected it. And I was still insecure and said, okay, I don't really like what you're saying, but since you said the last person did it for $100 and I'm quoting 150, how about 120? And they said, yes. I did it for 12 months at $120 per service. And every time I turned up, I'm like, I'm losing money being here. So after 12 months, I approached him and I says, you know what? I'm not making money at $120 here. It's worth $150 for me to be here every time I turn up. And the guy just about swore at me. He's like, that's a massive jump in price. And I could have said to him, you know what? It's what I quoted you, the original price anyway. So it's just what it needs to be. And I didn't. I said to him, I said, look, I can't do it for $120. I will do you another couple of services while you get quotes from somebody else until you find somebody to do it. But I'm only going to do it a couple of times at $120 while you find somebody else. He says, no, I'll pay you $150. I don't want somebody else to do my lawn. You do a good job.
So they're focusing on the result. They're not focusing on the time on site. They're not focusing on anything else. I'll tell you a story that happened the other week, which it's even surprised me. We do a pretty good job of filtering people these days, right? And that's one of the tricks, I guess, to what Keith Kalfas was talking about, where you have a lower number of people accepting your quotes, right? One of the tricks is just to filter them before you even get in there, so we can talk about that a bit later on. But we had filtered this guy, so we had worked out that, so at the moment, at Silverstone Gardening, we're really only taking on really big once-off jobs, like $1,000 plus, or high-end regular maintenance jobs, right?
Yeah.
And so this guy was going to be both. He needed a cleanup and he also wanted regular high-quality maintenance after. So I was like, oh, sweet. And I rock up to the house and I'm like, oh, my goodness, this is a time waster. The door, it looks like no one has been there in a long time. The gate is a classic wooden gate, so with the arch finish on it. And it is rotted off the hinge and it's just lying on the ground. The front door has, the weather has damaged it so bad. And this is it's in a pretty good suburb. It's not like in a fancy suburb, but it's not in a deadbeat suburb. It's just this house has been neglected.
Yep.
And he's got these massive, I would say 3.5 meter tall lily pillies that need to be cut back to the garden. And we're probably talking about half of the width needs to be removed, and it's just everything's overgrown. It's crazy. Now, luckily, the lawn was dead over winter, so there's just a lot of tall weeds. But anyone with experience knows that they're not too bad to cut compared to like thick kikuyu or cooch. But look, I'm trying to paint a picture. This job looked like he was a guy who was no way was he going to be able to afford our quote.
Yeah.
And so here's the trick that I do. Instead of lowering the price to try and meet their budget, I always up the price a bit, because the last thing you want to do is be just at the edge of someone's budget and then realize you've underquoted and now you have to start rushing. Because if someone's budget is, let's say it's $1,000, right, and you charge $1,000, it's going to be a painful $1,000 for them, right? Whereas if their budget is $1,000 and you charge $900, it's a little bit better. So when you charge at the maximum of their budget, they have no grace because they think you're expensive. And so they really nitpick. When you charge below their budget, right? So what you want to do in these scenarios where you think, don't lower your budget, because let's say it's an $1,100 job. He's got a budget of $1,000. You quote $1,000 when you should have quoted $1,100. He is going to nitpick everything you do. He is going to be so strict. And so I always raise the prices because I prefer to lose the job, right? Or win the job with heaps of time. So I add a couple of hundred to it so that if they are nitpicky, let's say their budget was $1,200 and I quote $1,200, they're going to be nitpicky, but we've got an extra $200 worth of time. So we're going to do a really good job. So this is my tactic whenever I'm doing these quotes. So I rock up to this guy's house. I'm like, he's going to have a budget of like $500, right? Like, I mean, I've wasted my time coming here, and he's not going to sign up for our packages. Our packages are expensive, And so anyways, look, I'm thinking about all this sort of stuff. And I just go, look, I'm just going to do my normal tactics. So we quoted, it was somewhere in the ballpark of like 1,100. It was something like that, right? I can't remember. Yeah. It was more than $1,000 for this cleanup job. And we got this email back like half an hour after we sent the quote saying, thank you so much. That's quite a reasonable price. And I had sent a message to my wife who was sending through the quote. I was like, he's never going to accept this. Bam, he accepted it. Now, because he's accepted it and he's accepted it at a high rate, we want to do the job quickly, right? And so I think he accepted it on a Wednesday and we had enough space on the next Monday, right? Which is great service for a big job like that, right? Turnaround. I go there with Elliot and Ethan, who are on our team. We get there at, 3 of us get there at, I think it was about 10 o'clock in the morning, and we're done by 12:30, right? So we're killing it, right? I don't know what the hourly rate works out to be, but there is, we got to go to tip after, so there is time at the tip as well. But the job, because there's a lot of experience, there's like 20-something years worth of experience on this job, it just gets done, right? Yeah. And one of the things that was good is because the gate was broken, there's so much space to drag all the branches through. Anyways, so look, that stuff's going on, and look, it is what it is. I'm thinking, I wonder how this guy is going to respond, because we've cut these hedges back so much, right? They look rubbish, but they're neat, right? But we told him this as well, like they're going to be sticks because of how bad. We get an email back being like, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much. And then he pays. So he gives us his credit card details. We charge his credit card that afternoon. And then he gives us a positive square review. And it's like the perfect client, the perfect situation from a job. And so me, 10 years in experience, we've done about 18,000 jobs or something like that as a business, right? Like, I'm still undervaluing what I think I can get. I'm still under appreciating what the client can do. And maybe 9 out of 10 times I'm accurate, but there's still these times where people are like that. And look, this happened last week. It still happens all the time. And so think about all these new people in business. You don't have that experience. You don't believe it to be true because you haven't seen it in your own life. And so there's so much doubt. There's so much you know, you don't have that steel spine when, like you was talking about, confident Garry walking in there.
Yeah.
And that's why you get pushed over a bit, I think.
Yep. Well, I think the excuse me, clear my throat again. The biggest problem I see people doing there is that they're quoting their time based on when they used to work for somebody else. So when I started $50 an hour, I thought that was awesome, because working for myself, I didn't account for expenses of running a business. I just looked at it and go, okay, $50 an hour is heaps more than what the labor rate is. So there's plenty of money there to cover expenses.
Yes, yes, yes.
And people do that all the time. They come into this line of work and they look at a job like you're talking about and they're going, and suppose you said 3 people on the job?
Yep.
So that's, say, a little bit less than 8 man hours on the job.
Yeah, it was 7 hours and 40 minutes.
Yeah, so pretty close.
I looked it up.
So if you look at it from the man hours on the job and you go, okay, for one person who's just left their insurance job and they're going out there to do their first job and they're going, oh, I think it's going to take me a day to do it. And in the back of their mind, they're going, oh, that's worth, say, $350 my time for the day. I'm going to whack that up to $500. That's pretty good, hey? What did you say you got for it? You know, and the reality is...
I'm going to look up this job so I can tell you exactly what. Because I remember the client's address. I'll have a look for you. But yes, it's...
Yeah. So you've got some really good numbers on this. I don't have them in front of me at the moment, but a very quick gauge to assess the cost of doing a job when you're starting out in lawn care is your labour rate times 3. And obviously there's massive variables in there that aren't coming into account. It's just a generalization. So if you look at the labour rate and you go, it's $350, then multiply that by 3. It should be at least over $1,000 for that job.
Hey everyone, this is just a quick little interjection in the podcast to say thank you for checking in. Hopefully you enjoyed the content. If you made it this far into the podcast, I really hope you are enjoying it and someone's not holding you against your will. But I just want to say, if you are enjoying it, I would really appreciate all the support you can get. Share it with your friends that you think will actually like it. Share it with your mum. Force her to watch it and say, Mum, if you don't watch it, then you don't love me. Actually, no, don't do that. Just share it with people who are actually in the industry. That's probably a better idea. We'll get back into the podcast, but I just want to say thank you so much. Any little share, like, subscribe, all that YouTube-y, podcasty stuff, you know what to do. But just thank you. And we'll get back into the podcast now. It was $1,061 we charged for the job. There you go. Yeah. Including GST.
So, like I said, all manner of variables that can change what the job is worth, but the generalized rule of the labour rate times 3 comes to a similar rate to what you charge, whereas the rookie who's just started in business and hasn't thought about the fact that they've got hidden expenses there and unbillable hours, they think that $500 for that job is absolutely awesome. Until they go to their account.
And look, to be honest, I can see some people who, for that sort of job and that sort of time, it's not terrible to charge much lower than what we did. I'm not saying, like, people don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying you should go out and be charging what we're charging, because we do have different expenses, and if you're just starting out, I totally appreciate that sometimes you just need the work, right? And so, like, any money is good money. And I do appreciate that we're at a different stage in business. So, and this is not trying to be some sort of show off. But the point of the story was to say there are moments where even when you're experienced, you don't believe people will accept your price. And yet they do. And it's because, look, for a whole lot of factors. But I would say, looking at that, the average is about $141 an hour. There were some tip fees involved, so it's probably $130 an hour or something like that in total at the end of the day. And that's about what we really aim for time on site. And some people, again, it's not trying to be bragging or anything like that. It's just I know there's people charging way more than us too. right? Like, don't get me wrong, like, especially ride on work, things like that. But the point is just to say, you can do a job if you have a great organization from start to finish. People answered the phone well, they were friendly, they were helpful, all that sort of stuff. And at the end of the day, the client can be really happy with that hourly rate. So just the whole point of that story is to take off those limitations and see what you can get, you know?
Yep, for sure. So to say those two lessons are critical for people listening to my podcast to understand those things, that you need to understand what you need to charge, and you need to be able to do it, like you're saying, with confidence that you're not going to win every job, but you're not out there to try and convince the customer that you're worth that amount of money.
No. Right. And that's when as soon as you start feeling or like you start lacking confidence, you got some, weak knees, the client senses that, right? And the ones who are, rightfully being selfish because it's business, right? They're going to pounce on that and they'll sense that. So let's talk about what's the difference between a job, paying or making yourself a job and almost pretending it's a business or feeling like it's a business, and having a real business. Because this is something that you talk about a lot, where people that have a job and then they go and make themselves another job. So what do you mean by that when you're talking about that?
All right, I want to paint this in the most positive light that I can, because I really do see it as a positive thing. And the best way to explain it is with a couple of different examples. So within our industry, you'll find people can enter the industry for a variety of reasons. And Matthew Wandmaker is one of the interviews I've done, where he's in Victoria and he's come from the banking sector to run a lawn care business. And what he's done is he's done similar to you. He's built up a business that is all about having employees doing the work, making sure that the equipment and the employees and all the expenses line up and there's profit there. And he's on the tools too. So it's not like he's just running a business from standing back and watching it happen. He's not sitting behind the desk. He's out there doing the whole lot. But that's a business. And it's great to see people who do it from that point of view. That's where they've put the effort in to go, all right, what do I want out of this as a business? And this is what I need to see. These are the markers I need to achieve in order to say that it's positive, that it's profitable, and that I want to keep doing it. When somebody creates a job for themselves, they often haven't put a lot of thought into it. Not to say that they don't, but on average, a lot of people don't put that much thought into it. And this is where I would have been labeled as a cowboy when I first started for that reason, because it's like, okay, as long as I'm replacing the income I had from the job that I had beforehand, then who cares? And I got a better lifestyle. So listening to podcasts that talk about entrepreneurs, they talk about people that are creating a lifestyle business versus people that are actually creating an investment for themselves. And lifestyle businesses or jobs usually are about exactly that. They're about just providing you lifestyle benefits. So it can range anywhere from gives me less time on the tools to it gives me the flexibility to tell somebody I don't want that job or I do want this job. But at the end of the day, if you've created yourself a job, you are a slave to the labor that you can do yourself. So, like I said, it can be positive, and it does have flexibility.
I think as well, like I think when you go online in those sorts of American business advice, sort of cliche podcasts and things like that, they do undervalue sometimes the honest work, the honest day's work. It's like if you're not a Bitcoin investor with all this stuff and you can go on your holiday onto the beach whenever you want, it's like, what are you doing with your life? But I think there was actually a study that came out recently. I heard it talked on a different podcast about how farmers are actually some of the happiest workers there are around, despite all the stresses that farmers go through. And some of the most unhappy people that work around are office jobs, right? And this is one of the things about working in the gardening industry is there's two huge pools, right? And I'm totally with you that I do not think less of anybody who works in that more, sort of, they're working a job that they work for themselves in a sense. But there's two huge major values to this industry. One is that working outside physically, right? Vitamin D, fresh air, exercise for your health, for your mental health. And when you're doing that as well, that free time you have to listen to podcasts, so self-help, investing into yourself in those areas, you don't get that in every job. And the second thing that you get is a massive job satisfaction 10, 15, 20 times a day when you turn around at the end of the job and go, that looks amazing and I did that. Like that was a mess and I've cleaned it up. 6 months ago, this lawn was dead and dying, and through spring and summer, I've revived it, and now it's a great place. And that's an honest day's work you're making. And this isn't hyperbole. This isn't over-exaggeration. Every gardener who does a good job literally makes the world a more beautiful place. Now, they're only making a tiny bit of the world a more beautiful place, but it is 100% true. Right? Yeah. If we did not have gardeners, if we did not have cleaners, if we didn't have all these little things that, these jobs that people look down on as the help, right? The world would look rubbish, ugly, overgrown, untamed, full of weeds, rubbish, this and that, right? And so there's such a great value to that, which a lot of business gurus on the internet don't understand, right? Because they see the day-to-day worker as the office job worker, job worker with the terrible 9 till 5, they hate their life, they hate their job, and yet you find the farmers, and I would then add in gardening is essentially residential farming. Obviously, there's no crop at the end of it. Sometimes there is, but like it's the same type of work outside. You can see visually what you've done when you plant your crop. A few months later, you can like that's the same sort of satisfaction, right? And so, man, there's a huge thing to that, and if you can get it right, like what. Like I totally understand the pull to that, but what's the difference between what's the challenges that people have between that mindset, I guess, of that I'm a worker, I've got to earn my wages. Sometimes when you start flipping that mindset to actually, no, this is more of a business. Yeah. What changes can you see, and what changes do you see interviewing people between those two with the way they think about things or the way they talk about things?
Oh, look, there's so many things that come into that, a lot of factors that really determine why somebody might choose one path or another path or change between those. And for a lot of people, they hit a brick wall because they are not capable of changing their mindset from providing a job for themselves to actually running a business that has employees. If you talk to the people who are running multiple teams of employees, and you look at what they're actually doing, it's all the same sort of thing that you're doing on your own if you're running a business which is just self-employing, providing your job. All the same sort of things, but at a different scale. So I guess the biggest thing in the mindset difference is going, okay, is my job just being on the tools or is my job growing a business? Because I can do all of the things that are required to have that business of 10 people there on my own. But when I'm doing it for 10 people, I might feel overwhelmed by the responsibility and the burden involved in doing that. So it's much easier to pull back and go back to just going, all right, I'll just be on my own and I don't have to worry about being responsible for somebody else and their family and then, the next person and their family.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that mindset can free you or it can hold you bondage.
Right. Yeah.
So,
when you're talking about that, to change, it's like you brought something up that I think it's a little bit of change in what you were saying, but in the same lane that you're talking about that mindset between sort of working for somebody else and working for yourself. And then you start hiring people and it's a little bit of a different mindset again.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found that this is something I didn't do when I look back and I should have done is before I hired somebody, what would have been really helpful would have been to treat myself as if I was an employee. Because one of the things that happens when things go wrong, right? Who in the business, who fixes it? The business owner, right? And
Yeah.
so you just work more hours and you take on more stress. And it's really great for personal development, right? Because you've got to become a person who can take on those hours and take on that stress. And then what happens is you hire somebody, and when something goes wrong, you half expect them to take on more hours and to take on more stress, but they're a hired hand, so they walk away because it's their weekend. But you still got to clean up all the mess. And one of the things that would be really cool, and this is, I think, what could be quite transformational for some people, is what if you treated yourself like an employee and gave yourself a weekend where you didn't touch the business?
Yeah.
People go, well, everything would fall apart. Well, maybe that's the problem. What can you now change that would allow yourself to fully embrace being an employee for your own business instead of shunning it and looking at it like, oh, no, I want to be an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurs do long hours and entrepreneurs do this and that. What if you treated yourself, go reverse psychology on it for a second? I'm an employee and I want to have my 4 weeks holiday a year, and I want to get paid my super, and I want to get paid my sick leave, and I want to be able to have my weekends off and have my nights off. And I think what that does is that starts preparing you a little bit for what the real world is like with employees, because you've put yourself in those shoes for 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is. And when you hire somebody, it's not such of a shock, you know?
Yep. Yeah, look, I've seen this numerous times in what I've done myself and in what other people have done as well. But you look at that change from treating your time as having no value to treating it as having the value of a set wage. And I've seen this where I've gone, okay, if I look at how much money my business made, the turnover, and then I look at the profit margin. So just simple maths here. We're not getting into all of the things you need to know, Luke, but just simple turnover minus expenses. That's profit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
That's the first place people start. They go, okay, if I've got a $80,000 turnover for the year and I spent $20,000, that's $60,000 profit. So the first thing that person does is they go, $60,000 profit, and the average income in Australia at the moment is $80,000 to $90,000. I need to work harder. Yeah. Instead of going, how do I make my business more profitable? I need to do more hours. And when you break that down and you go, okay, and the average lawn care business where you've got one person working, simply being the business owner is the best way to look at that, right? So just the one person working, doing all of the work. The average business should be able to turn over $100,000 to $200,000, and $150,000 is reasonable without overdoing your stress levels and your workload.
Yeah.
So if you look at that and you go, okay, break that down into how much of that turnover is wages. So if you look at that and you go, that one person who's doing all of the work of the business is doing more than 36 hours a week of working, because they're doing 36 hours of cutting roses and cutting grass and, you know, on the job, plus another 6 hours of drive time in between jobs, plus another 6 hours of maintenance of the tools and emergency repairs because they didn't do their maintenance on time, and then another couple of hours of administration. And yes, everybody has some emergency repairs because they didn't do their maintenance on time, or because they were stupid and they hit a steel post.
What do you mean? I've never done that.
I hit a steel pipe in the ground one day that was like the old plumbing pipes where the actual wall thickness of the steel was 10 millimeters thick.
Yeah.
That one hurt. Anyway, the point I'm making is not about that. The point I'm making is that once you start breaking down the costs of the wages and going, okay, if I stepped off the tools tomorrow and I paid somebody else to go out there and mow the lawns, how much is that going to cost me?
Yeah. And often they're not making money off that.
Yeah. Well, simply being is that if you're just in the mindset of work harder, I can do more hours, you're not actually taking into account what it costs to do the business. And you don't even need to break down, I need an admin
Yeah.
person and I need a HR person and I need an accountant, all the various different roles that are off the tools, but just simply being, what does it cost to replace the person doing the job on the tools each day? Once you start looking at that,
Yeah.
then your mindset starts changing to going, okay, do I really want to be working solo and doing 60-hour weeks?
Well, that's the thing about like if your answer is work harder, okay, that can only go so far.
Yeah.
Right? There's only so many hours you can work. There's only so much effort you can give. And then the end result of work harder, work harder, work harder is eventually burnout. And so
Well,
if that's
60 hours
been
a week
the
turns to
modus
70 hours a week.
operandi of the business, which turns to 80, right?
Yeah.
And then something goes, if your average week is 60 hours a week, right? That means that bad weeks are 70, 75. Yeah. And then you end up rushing your jobs. And when you start rushing your jobs, what happens? You start losing clients. You start getting a little bit of bad word of mouth. You start losing a bit of confidence in your quoting because you think, oh, and it's funny. It's like so much of those problems, they started out because somebody didn't realize that instead of working harder, they should have been charging more or working with more efficient equipment or things like that. But often it's not, we say work smarter, work harder, right? Like which one should you pick? But sometimes there isn't any more smarter, if you get what I mean. Like sometimes you can't fit a 72-inch zero turn through the standard back gate. You have to take your 21-inch self-propelled mower. It's like at some point you've got to put your big girl panties on and charge the right price.
And that's where the mindset changes. Once you start going, okay, I need to pay for Luke to go out there and cut the grass for me, and he's going to spend 8 hours out there. I'm going to pay him $35 an hour because he's a pretty decent worker. And then after I pay Luke, I've got to pay for the fuel and the insurance and all the other expenses. And then I've got to cover my time to send the invoice and do all the administration work that goes along with that as well. Then you start going, okay, of the price point that I need to achieve to cover wages and expenses and, that dirty word, I think you know which one I'm talking about, profit.
Very dirty. We'll have to censor that just to have the podcast still stay online,
Yeah, well, we are in the dungeon, so we'll let it slide at this end. I don't know about your end. But, yeah.
No, it's funny how many people get, it's like, and I said this in my last podcast about how people in the industry, they don't feel comfortable charging for profit. But why would you take on so much risk? Why would you? Because you are not guaranteed to get paid. You are not guaranteed that you'll even have work in 3 months. Especially if you're a business that does a lot of big commercial jobs and, the end of financial year's coming up and everyone wants to save a cent or two, and all of a sudden you've lost 2 out of your 3 big clients, and there's so much risk. You talk about hitting a steel pole. It's like, why wouldn't you have the profit in the back to prepare for that and to be?
So let me put it to you this way,
I could preach this all day.
The average person, being me back 13 years ago, gets busier and busier and busier. And then they go, oh, you know what? I'm really busy. And, didn't say this out loud back then, but I'm really busy working for $10 an hour. I'm going to go and pay somebody else $20 an hour to come and work with me.
Yep.
And then after I've paid them $20 an hour, I'm like, oh, what do I pay myself? Oh.
Yeah. Nothing. Negative.
Yeah, it's a lose-lose situation, which is why I did this time and time and time again, and other people do it as well, is it's the busy period. I'm going to put on a helper, and as soon as I get through the busy period, I'm firing them because it's not cost-effective to keep them on unless you get your prices right. And so that swing, that cycle of get busier, get busier, get busier, gets perpetuated in a downward cycle when you put an employee on. And a lot of people go through that cycle, and they, if they're foolish enough like me, they might do it for 5 or 6 years before they realize that they need to get their prices right. Or they fail and they go back to working for the insurance company.
Yeah. And look, it all comes down to essentially not checking your numbers. So you're flying blind, and then not having the confidence to pull it off. And that's why I tell these stories where, like the job where we did $1,000 in 7.5 hours, basically. It's like, the reason why I'm telling that story is not to brag, is to help you put steel in your spine. If you're listening to this, you're 6 months in, you're 2 years in. I'm not saying you can go out and do this today, but you can build a business that can do that, right? Because you saw the photo of where I started, right? Like that was about a year in for me, right? When I hired the first guy, maybe 9 months in or something like that, around that, when that photo was taken, right? This is not, I didn't start with everything worked out. It took 10 years to get to this point, but it's possible. Yeah. And I would love it. Like, there's a little bit of like I have some chats with some guys, some friends of ours. You've met them up north. We're talking about, what it's like for them, and they're killing it compared to where I was. And it's like, I'm listening to this, like when they were young, when I was as young in business as they were, 2 years in, 3 years in, they're killing it compared to me. And there's a part of me which is like, I wish I had, the Lawn Stars podcast, and I wish I had these Facebook groups, and I wish I had this advice back. And that's why I started the podcast, because it's like, there is nothing stopping you. There's nothing stopping you. I mean, you got to work for it. You got to put the time in. You got to work out your marketing. You got to work out your finances. You can't just mow lawns, come home and play Xbox. Like, there's a bit more to it than that. But if you are committed, you can get a business that is successful in this industry, not limited to $50 an hour.
I look at a couple of numbers that are important for me. And, we're talking about how important numbers are to run a business, and it really is the case. And getting that profit margin allows you to have an employee and still keep in business, whereas instead of going through that cycle of going backwards and forwards. The numbers that are important for me these days is looking at how many businesses there are in Australia that do lawn care. And last time I looked, it was about 18,000 businesses in Australia doing lawn care. We know a couple of things about that. So we know that there's about 5,000 people in the Lawn Mowing Contractors Australia Facebook group. Those people, I would say for the most part, are active in business. And there's going to be a few of them who are closing their business and either hanging around the group or leaving the group. But there's some active numbers compared to the total numbers of 18,000. I've been looking at my podcast going, how can I reach 5,000 people in LMCA? Well, I can target them directly with posts saying, come and listen to the podcast. How can I reach the 18,000 that are in business in Australia so that I can, have a mission for the podcast of reaching people that can make a difference? And what I've realized is that it's not the people who are already in business. It's the ones who might want to start a business, and they're out there. And if there's 18,000 total and there's 5,000 in the LMCA that we know of, I'd say that there's a large percentage of people who either are unaware or they're in the process of leaving the business already. Not working for them, not getting their numbers right, whatever the case is. So can I get those people who are leaving already, or should I be trying to get them before they start? If I can find the right way to get my podcast in front of people so that they can make the right choices sooner, I'll get more listeners for my podcast, yay. But we'll also see people actually getting what they want from being in business instead of going through those cycles of poverty thinking, of scarcity mindset.
That's the thing as well, man. Like, the more people that get out of the scarcity mindset, it's not, what will happen is, it's not like there's a limited number of people who can pay for these services. Or like, no, let me reword that. There is a limited number of people who can pay for these services.
Yeah.
The limited number of people who are going to be able to pay $1,000, that is in your head for a service like that, like we described before. It's in your head. But I think one of the things that happens is the more people that charge $1,000, the obvious thing is, well, more people expect to be charged $1,000 for that sort of service, and so it won't be such a shock. Okay, that's the obvious thing, right? Yeah. That happens in the industry. But here's the non-obvious thing that happens as well. When you charge the $500, rush it, and do an average job, it undersells the value of the industry. The person who does $1,000, right, and does a great job. So what happens is charging more, I believe, in the long run, not in the next 6 months, right, but maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years. If everyone starts charging more, what will happen is clients who you take your time, you do a great job, you get great results. Instead of less and less people being available to pay those fees, they will tell their friends. And their friends who are doing pretty well will go, look, maybe in a year's time, I'll get my hedging done for $1,000. And that $1,000 is going to get me a great result. And they were not interested in doing it before because they thought they were going to have to pay $500 for someone who's going to do a rubbish job. It wasn't the money that was the limiting factor. It was they thought they were going to get a rubbish job. They thought they were going to get someone who was just a old hack, or just cutting corners. And so I actually think instead of more people charging more money and then fighting over less pieces of the pie, if you get what I mean, like there's more people trying to eat the same pie, so there's less pieces for everybody. I think those people who do it successfully will slowly, over time, create an industry where, do you know what? If you get some of these people, they actually do a really, really good job. It's worth it. They don't cut corners, and you get recommendations, and it makes more people interested in getting services done.
Yeah. I think that there's value in the person who does that job for $500 too. And in my area, I would say that if you look at the number of jobs that come up that are overgrown, I would say 9 out of 10 of those overgrown jobs like that are for the cowboy or for the new person in business, and they are worth $500.
Yep.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's not going to be the same as getting Silverstone Gardening out there to do that job. So there is going to be room for both in our industry. And I guess if you're looking at it, comparing it to other industries, if you get a plumber to come and fix your plumbing, you might not want it to keep leaking after it's finished, right? So you might be going, I don't really want to pay $180 an hour for a plumber, but I want it fixed properly. So when you get the plumber out there that quotes $60 to do the job, and you go, I better get a second quote just to be sure. The next person comes in and quotes $180 to do the job. And you're like, which one do I go with? And you look at the two plumbers standing side by side. One of them's got a ripped uniform and an old beat up car, and the other guy's, looks like he knows what he's talking about. It's like, well, do I pay the $180 to get the guy who looks like he actually did his trade certificate? And I think with lawn mowing, you can afford to get the guy who's going to do a poor job, but you're probably going to be having poor expectations from the start. And it's okay. I'm happy to pass jobs to people based on the type of work that I think needs to be done, rather than me taking on all of the jobs for my business. That person can't afford $1,000 this week, but they deserve to get something done. And I know somebody who's willing to do it for $500.
Yeah. And look, those clients, those people are not, like you're saying, they're not a problem because the expectation matches the budget.
And the reality is that person's probably going to spend 4.5 hours on that job instead of 8 hours on the job.
Yep. And it might look a little bit untidy, but look, it's more tidy than what it was when it started.
Yeah.
Look, Gary, I'm out of time today. I've got to go help my kids get ready for dinner. Well, not dinner, but Carrie actually cooked the dinner, and then they can have it. Yep. What time's over there? 6:30, surely? Close to?
Yeah, 6:20 p.m. So it is definitely dinner time now.
You're almost ready for some KFC zinger boxes, right?
Oh, don't talk to me about KFC. I love KFC so much, but it doesn't love me. So
no, that's why I brought it up. We're not having KFC either. Anyways, where can people find you, Gary?
Look, they can find me all over the place. The best place to find me is to go to a podcast player or Spotify and look up Aussie Lawn Stars. And
I highly recommend the podcast. I was listening to the latest episode this morning, and And I think, look, anybody starting out in the industry, it's a must listen. You've got so much experience, so many shortcuts. If you want to save all the pain that me and you went through 7, 8 years ago, 9, 10 years ago, jump on Garry's podcast. Look, mate, thanks for coming on. And I'm sure this will be one of many over the years. But look, thanks for that. And we'll see you around.
I'll look forward to seeing you again soon.